Right now, in this moment, something in you is working very hard. Not your lungs, not your heart. Something else. Something is scanning this room, deciding whether you are safe. Something is calculating how you appear to the people sitting next to you. Something is already thinking about what you will eat after this, what you need to do tomorrow, whether you sent that message, whether that person is still upset with you. Your mind is busy. And I want to ask you, why? Why is the human mind the only mind on this planet that cannot simply be still? A dog lying in the sun is lying in the sun. It is not contemplating the sun. It is not wondering if it deserves the sun. It is not afraid that one day the sun will rise and it will not be there to feel it. But you cannot lie in the sun without eventually arriving at a thought you do not want. And that thought, at its deepest root, is always the same thought. I'm going to die. That is what we are talking about today. Not death as a concept. Not death as a philosophy lecture. Death as the thing that is already quietly running in the background of every single decision you have ever made. We are talking about existential dread. And I promise you, by the time we are done, you will understand yourself in a way that is uncomfortable, clarifying, and perhaps for the first time, honest. Let me give you a fact that no other creature on earth has to carry. You know you will die. Not in theory. Not as a religious teaching you were handed as a child. You know it. Somewhere in you, beneath every layer of distraction and routine and ambition, there is a knowledge that is absolute. That one ordinary day your consciousness will stop. The world will continue. And you will not be in it. Every other animal on this planet, the elephant, the crow, the chimpanzee, even those with measurable intelligence, even those who show behaviors around their dead that look almost like grief, none of them carry the abstract, future-projected, self-aware knowledge of their own death the way you do. This is not a gift. This is a fracture. Psychologists call it the mortality salience problem. It is the moment when the awareness of death becomes psychologically activated, when it moves from background to foreground, and the result is measurable, predictable, and deeply revealing. When researchers remind people of their own mortality, even subtly, even by asking them to write a sentence about death, human behavior changes in very specific ways. People become more tribal. They defend their cultural worldview more aggressively. They punish those who are different from them more harshly. They cling more tightly to people who affirm their beliefs. They seek fame, legacy, money, status, not because these things make them happy, but because these things feel like permanence in a world that promises them none. This is the beginning of terror management theory, one of the most important and least discussed frameworks in all of modern psychology. And it says something radical. Most of what you think is ambition is actually fear wearing ambition's clothes. What happens when the brain realizes it is mortal? In 1986, three psychologists, Jeff Greenberg, Sheldon Solomon, and Tom Piszczynski, built on the work of cultural anthropologist Ernest Becker and proposed something that the academic world was deeply uncomfortable with. They said, the primary engine of human culture, human behavior, and human civilization is not love, not reason, not progress. It is the management of terror. Specifically, the terror of death. Becker, in his Pulitzer Prize-winning book The Denial of Death, argued that the human being exists in a paradox that no other creature faces. We are, in his words, gods who sh*t. We have the cognitive capacity to imagine infinity, to compose symphonies, to build cathedrals, to fall in love across decades, and we are, simultaneously, fragile meat that will rot. That contradiction is unbearable. And so the mind builds a system to manage it. That system has three components, and I want you to recognize yourself in each one. Component 1, self-esteem. Self-esteem, according to terror management theory, is not primarily about feeling good about yourself. It is a buffer against death anxiety. When you feel significant, when you feel that you matter, that your life has value, that you are seen, the terror quiets. This is why a damaged self-esteem does not just feel bad. It feels threatening at a primal level. It feels like annihilation. Because psychologically, it is pointing you toward the same place death points you, toward insignificance, toward erasure. Every time someone criticizes you and it feels disproportionately devastating, this is why. You are not just processing feedback. You are fighting for psychological survival. Component 2, cultural worldview. Every culture on Earth, without exception, provides its members with a story. A story about where we came from, what we are here for, what happens after we die, and what makes a life worth living. These stories are not just traditions. They are anxiety management systems. Religion tells you that death is not the end. Nationalism tells you that you are part of something larger than yourself that will outlast you. Ideological movements tell you that you are on the right side of history. Even secular culture tells you that if you are remembered, If you build enough, create enough, love enough, leave enough, some part of you persists. These stories exist because the alternative, accepting death as absolute, as total, as the complete end of your consciousness without remainder, is something the average human mind cannot sustain. Can you sustain it? Right now. Not philosophically. Viscerally. Can you hold in your mind the idea that one day there will be nothing, no you, no awareness, no experience of anything, and remain calm? Most people cannot. Most people's minds immediately flee that thought. They find a religious reassurance. They find a logical reframe. They find a distraction. They find something, anything, to move away from the raw edge of that realization. That movement away is not weakness. It is the operating system doing its job. But it is also the invisible hand behind an enormous amount of your behavior. Component 3, symbolic immortality. When the first two strategies are not enough, when self-esteem is wounded and the cultural story feels thin, humans reach for a third tool. Legacy. The book. The child. The company. The monument. The name on the building. The viral video. The memory in someone else's mind. The idea that some trace of you, some impression, will persist after the body is gone. This drive is so powerful that people will sacrifice comfort, relationships, health, and happiness in its pursuit. Because the unconscious mind is doing a calculation that sounds something like this. If I am remembered, I am not completely gone. If I am not completely gone, then death is not completely total. And if death is not completely total, I can breathe. Now here is the question I want you to sit with. When was the last time you made a decision, truly, purely because it brought you joy? And when was the last time you made a decision because some part of you was afraid of disappearing? The geography of terror. Existential dread does not announce itself. It does not arrive with a label. It is one of the most expertly disguised psychological experiences in the human inventory. It hides in places you would not expect. It hides in Sunday evenings. There is a specific feeling that many people experience at the end of a weekend. A low-grade unease. A heaviness that is not quite sadness, not quite anxiety, not quite loneliness, but somehow all three at once. Psychologists sometimes call this the Sunday scaries, and popular culture attributes it to work dread. But go deeper. Sunday evening is quiet. The week's noise has not yet started. The distractions are momentarily off. And in that stillness, in that brief gap between one chapter and the next, something underneath the surface has the chance to move. That unease is not about Monday. Monday is just the excuse. That unease is the dread, briefly surfacing through a crack in the noise. It hides in your relationship with success. Have you ever achieved something significant, something you worked toward for months or years, and felt, almost immediately after achieving it, a strange hollowness? The promotion arrives. The relationship begins. The goal is reached. And instead of peace, there is a quiet, inexplicable emptiness. This is not ingratitude. This is not a character flaw. This is the dread briefly unmasked. Because the achievement was functioning as an answer. When I get this, I will matter, I will be safe, I will be real. And when the achievement arrives and the dread is still there, the structure briefly collapses. The mind rebuilds it immediately. It finds the next goal, the next milestone, the next proof of significance. And the cycle continues. It hides in your phone. The average person checks their phone over 90 times per day. Research consistently shows that a primary driver of compulsive phone use is not curiosity. It is avoidance of interior silence. Because silence is where the dread waits. We have built, collectively, the most sophisticated distraction machine in human history. And we carry it in our pockets. And we reach for it, reflexively, compulsively, almost without awareness, every time the interior becomes too quiet. The dread is not the only thing in the silence. But it lives there. And the body knows it. And the hand moves toward the phone before the conscious mind even makes a decision. It hides in your anger. Terror management research has produced one of the most disturbing findings in social psychology. When people are reminded of their own mortality, even unconsciously, they become measurably more aggressive toward people who are different from them. Different religion, different nationality, different values, different lifestyle. The mechanism is this: if my worldview is the thing keeping my death terror at bay, then someone whose worldview contradicts mine is not just annoying, they are existentially threatening. They are suggesting by their very existence that my story about the world might be wrong. And if my story is wrong, my buffer is gone. And if my buffer is gone, I am exposed to the full weight of what I have been suppressing. So I attack. Not rationally. Not proportionally. With a ferocity that surprises even me sometimes. Much of what looks like political rage, cultural conflict, and ideological warfare is, at its root, competing mortality management systems in collision. We are not fighting about policy. We are fighting about who gets to be reassured that their life means something. What thinkers have said that we were not ready to hear. This is not a new discovery. The dread has been described, analyzed, wrestled with, and, occasionally, faced honestly by some of the sharpest minds in human history. Søren Kierkegaard, the 19th-century Danish philosopher, called it the dizziness of freedom. He described anxiety not as the fear of a specific thing, but as the fear of nothingness, of the void that opens up when you realize that existence is not guaranteed, not permanent, not safe. He was not describing a pathology. He was describing the honest condition of being human and awake. Martin Heidegger went further. He argued that most people spend their entire lives in what he called das Man, the anonymous they, the crowd, the cultural noise, precisely to avoid confronting their own finitude. He said that authentic living, real, chosen, meaningful living, only becomes possible when a person stops running and turns to face death directly. Not as morbidity, as clarification. Death, for Heidegger, is not the enemy of meaning. It is the condition of meaning. Because a life that went on forever would have no urgency, no weight, no reason to choose one thing over another. It is the deadline that makes the work matter. Albert Camus approached it differently. He said the central question of philosophy is this: given that life is absurd, given that we are conscious beings in an indifferent universe with no guaranteed meaning, why not simply give up? His answer was neither religion nor suicide. His answer was revolt. To live in full awareness of the absurdity, to refuse to be crushed by it, to create meaning anyway, not because the universe provides it but because the human being, in full knowledge of the void, chooses to. That is not pessimism. That is one of the most radical acts of defiance ever proposed. Irvin Yalom, the contemporary existential psychiatrist, has spent decades in clinical practice watching what the dread actually does to real people in real lives. He writes about what he calls awakening experiences, moments when the reality of mortality breaks through the suppression system and forces a person into a reckoning. A cancer diagnosis, the death of a close friend, a serious accident, a milestone birthday, the sudden sensation in ordinary daylight that time is not stopping. These moments, Yalom observes, are terrifying. And they are also, for many of his patients, the beginning of the most honest, most alive period of their lives. Because the suppression had been costing them something they did not know they were paying. And this is where I want to spend some time with you. Because this is the part that matters most. The suppression of death anxiety is not free. It extracts a price. And most people pay it without knowing they are paying it for their entire lives. The first cost is unlived life. When your choices are driven, even partially, by the need to manage death terror, you are not fully choosing. You are reacting. The career that was chosen for status rather than meaning. The relationship maintained for comfort rather than genuine connection. The years spent accumulating proof of significance rather than experiencing the life that was already there. Terror management theory predicts, and clinical observation confirms, that people whose death anxiety is very high tend to live more rigidly, more conventionally, more fearfully. Not because they are cowards, but because their system is running on survival mode, and survival mode does not take creative risks. The second cost is relational distance. If other people's different worldviews are threatening to your mortality buffer, then genuine intimacy, which requires encountering someone who is genuinely different from you, becomes threatening too. Deep intimacy requires you to let someone be themselves, fully, including the parts that challenge your story about the world. Death anxiety makes that very difficult. It makes us seek mirrors rather than windows, people who reflect our worldview back to us rather than people who expand it. The result is a loneliness that is all the more painful for being surrounded by people. The third cost is the inability to be present. The present moment, unmediated, unfiltered, without distraction or narrative, is also where the dread most easily surfaces. So the mind, in its wisdom, makes the present moment dangerous. It keeps you in the past, replaying, reviewing, regretting. It keeps you in the future, planning, projecting, worrying. Anywhere but here, in this breath, in this moment, which is also adjacent to the moment of silence where the dread waits. Every meditation teacher in history has noticed this. The inability to simply be here. The restlessness. The constant mental motion. It is not a concentration problem. It is a terror management problem. The fourth cost, and perhaps the most devastating, is inauthenticity. When Ernest Becker wrote about the immortality projects that humans construct, the systems of meaning, legacy, and significance that buffer the terror, He noted something heartbreaking. Many people build their entire identity around an immortality project that they did not choose. The inherited religion, the family expectation, the cultural script, the performance of a self that was constructed not from genuine desire but from the need to belong to a group whose worldview keeps the dread at bay. And they live that identity, sometimes fully, sometimes brilliantly, but there is a hollowness at the center that never quite fills. Because the project was never really theirs. I have not brought you here to terrify you. I have brought you here to be honest with you. Because you have been carrying this, you have always been carrying this, and no one in your ordinary life ever gave you permission to look at it directly. So let me give you that permission now. The dread is real. It is not a malfunction. It is not a sign of weakness or neuroticism or spiritual failure. It is the honest response of an intelligent, self-aware being to a genuine and unsolvable problem. You are alive. You will die. The gap between those two facts is your life. And the only question that existential psychology ultimately asks, is, are you spending that gap running from the second fact, or are you using it to make the first fact fully real? Here is what the research and the philosophy and the clinical evidence and the honest testimony of human beings who have faced their mortality and come out the other side actually says. Facing the dread does not destroy you. Facing the dread clarifies you. Not because the problem is solved. It is never solved. There is no philosophical argument, no spiritual tradition, no psychological framework that makes death not real. But there is a difference, a profound, measurable, life-altering difference, between a person who is unconsciously governed by death terror and a person who has looked at it, acknowledged it, and made a conscious choice about how to live in its presence. The psychologist who has faced their finitude and chosen to be a psychologist anyway, not for legacy but because it is genuinely meaningful to them, is doing a different thing from the person who became a psychologist because it made their parents proud and the approval kept the anxiety quiet. The parent who loves their child in full awareness that both of them are mortal and time is finite, that love is a different quality from the love that uses the child as an immortality project, as proof of significance, as an extension of a self that is terrified of disappearing. The relationship with your own mortality changes the quality of everything. What you can actually do. I will not leave you with theory alone. Here is what the evidence actually supports. 1. Name it. The single most powerful intervention in anxiety, existential or otherwise, is accurate labeling. When you feel the Sunday dread, when you feel the hollow after achievement, when you feel the compulsive reach for the phone in a moment of stillness, name what is happening. This is mortality salience. This is the dread briefly surfacing. This is my system doing its job. That naming does not make the feeling disappear. But it changes your relationship to it. You are no longer swept by it. You are watching it. And a feeling you can watch is a feeling you can choose a response to. 2. Voluntary stillness. The mind avoids stillness because stillness is adjacent to the dread. But research on mindfulness and existential awareness consistently shows that practice stillness chosen deliberately, returned to regularly, gradually reduces the terror of interior silence. Not because the silence becomes safe in the way a distraction is safe, but because you discover, through repeated encounter, that you can be in the silence and survive it. That the dread surfaces and you do not shatter. That there is something in you that can hold even the hardest truth. This is not meditation as relaxation. This is meditation as courage. 3. Genuine meaning making. Terror management theory predicts that meaning built on external validation, status, approval, legacy as a performance, is fragile, because it depends on others to maintain the buffer. Genuine meaning built from authentic values, from things you would pursue even if no one were watching, from connections and contributions that matter to you, is more stable. It does not require constant social reinforcement. It does not collapse when the approval stops. Ask yourself, and answer honestly, what you would do with your life if no one would ever know. If there were no legacy, no memory, no record. If it were only the experience itself. What remains, when you strip away the performance, is closer to who you actually are. 4. Intimacy with mortality. This sounds grim. It is not. It is perhaps the most life-affirming practice available to a human being. Some traditions call it memento mori, remember that you will die. The Stoics practiced it daily. Some Buddhist traditions place the contemplation of impermanence at the center of spiritual practice. Contemporary psychotherapy increasingly recognizes that clients who have been forced, by illness, by loss, by near-death experience, to confront their mortality directly often emerge with a clarity about what actually matters that years of comfortable living never produced. You do not have to wait for a diagnosis to access this clarity. You can choose to sit with the fact of your own finitude, not to depress yourself but to use it as a lens. To ask from that vantage point, is this how I want to spend the time I have? The answer to that question, asked genuinely, has the power to reorganize your life. You walked in here today carrying something you have been carrying your whole life. The knowledge that you will die, the anxiety that knowledge produces, and the enormous, elaborate, ingenious psychological structure you have built, that all of us have built, to keep that knowledge from overwhelming us. That structure is not a flaw. It is a marvel of adaptation. It has allowed human beings to function, to love, to build, to create, to persist, in full awareness of their own extinction. But the structure has a shadow. And the shadow is the life that does not get lived because the structure takes up too much room. The authentic choices that do not get made because the buffer needs protecting. The presence that does not get accessed because the silence is too close to the void. I'm not asking you to dismantle the structure. I'm asking you to see it. Because a person who can see their own defenses is a person who has a choice about them. And a person who has a choice, even in the face of the most unchosen fact of their existence, is a person who is, in the deepest sense, free. If you like this, then like and subscribe. And also give your opinions in comment box if this is happening to you. So the dread is real. The death is coming. The time between now and then is the only thing that is actually yours. What are you going to do with it?